Have you ever looked into the ocean and wondered what could be moving beneath the surface where no human being can see? At the bottom of the world, the Southern Ocean is a place where the water stays just above freezing. The winds can rage for days, and there may be nothing but endless ocean in every direction. No nearby harbor, no land to break the wind. Just cold darkness and waves rolling across thousands of miles. And according to strange reports from crews working in these waters, something unusual has appeared beneath the surface. Not a whale, not a fish, something pale, something enormous. And when witnesses struggled to describe it, they reached for a word that means something very different from monster. They called it Ningen. Before we reveal what these crews claim they saw beneath the Antarctic waters, hit like and subscribe, because this mystery gets stranger from here. The Southern Ocean is already one of the most isolated environments on Earth, with powerful winds, towering waves, and stretches of almost complete darkness. So when something pale rises from that darkness, the question becomes impossible to ignore. What exactly are people seeing? The honest disclaimer: this is a story about that pale shape. But before we go any further, you deserve total honesty, because this case does not work without it. There is no museum specimen of the thing the crews describe. There is no skeleton in a drawer, no verified photograph, no tissue sample, no bone a scientist has held in a gloved hand and confirmed. By every official measure that exists, the creature these men talk about does not exist. It is not in the textbooks. It is not on the species lists. If you asked a marine biologist to confirm it, they would tell you correctly that there is nothing to confirm. And yet, the story does not die. It surfaces every few years from new crews on new ships. And what should make the hair on your arm stand up is this: the description barely changes. Different vessels, different nationalities, different decades, the same impossible shape. Many of the men who describe it swear they had never heard of such a thing before, the night they saw it for themselves. They were not primed for it. They had no name for it in their heads as they stood at the rail. The name came afterward when they tried to explain what they could not explain. That name is Ningen. It is a Japanese word, and it does not mean beast. It does not mean leviathan. It does not mean kraken or serpent or any of the old words sailors have always used for the things in the deep. Ningen means simply human being. When the crews finally settled on what to call the pale giant in the water, they did not reach for a word that put distance between it and themselves. They reached for the most intimate word there is. They looked at this thing, the length of their ship, gliding beneath them, in water, deep enough to swallow a skyscraper, and the word that came out of their mouths was the word for us. Sit with that for a moment, because that single choice of name is the entire hook of this case. Once you call a thing a human being, you have already told the story. You have planted an image that no calm, rational explanation ever fully pulls back out. So, this video is not going to claim to prove the Ningen is real. That is not the job here. The job is to put you on the black water beside the men who say they saw it, to walk through what they describe one cold detail at a time, the way a detective walks through a case file, to separate what the geography genuinely allows from what it almost certainly does not, and to sit at the end with the one question that keeps this legend alive across years and oceans and languages. What could be down there, in a sea we have barely visited? And why, of all the shapes it could take, does it look so much like us? The place to understand the story, you have to first understand the place, because the place is half the case. We like to imagine that the ocean is mapped. It is not. Vast stretches of the seafloor at the bottom of the world remain a complete blank, a smear of estimated depths and educated guesses. We have detailed, photograph-quality maps of craters on the surface of the Moon, 250,000 miles away. We have walked up there. We have a flag planted in the dust. And yet, there are trenches and basins in the Southern Ocean that no instrument has ever properly surveyed. More human beings have stood on the highest mountain on Earth than have descended to the deepest parts of the sea. Let that sink in. The peak we treat as the ultimate human achievement has more visitors than the bottom of our own planet. And here is the part people get wrong. They assume that a blank space on the map means a cover-up. They imagine secrecy, suppression, men in offices deciding what you are allowed to know. The truth is far simpler, and in its own way, far more humbling. The ocean keeps its secrets for one plain reason. We are almost never there. The waters are too violent to sit and watch, too cold to linger in, too far from anywhere for the casual eye to wander past. For most of human history, only a small handful of working crews doing brutal jobs on long contracts ever laid eyes on this water at all. There is no conspiracy of silence. There is just absence. There is just an ocean so remote and so hostile that for centuries almost no one has been looking when it decided to show itself. So, when you ask why we don't have a clean photograph, why there is no specimen in a tank under bright lights, the honest answer has nothing to do with secrecy. It has to do with how few eyes have ever been there to see anything at all. The witnesses. And that brings us to the eyes that were, because the accounts that built this legend did not come from drunk tourists leaning off a cruise ship rail. They did not come from teenagers with overactive imaginations. They trace back to research and survey crews on long deployments, men working some of the hardest jobs the sea has to offer. Whale researchers, fisheries observers, survey teams, logging ice and water temperature in conditions that would break most people in a week. These were seasoned professionals, men who had spent years of their lives on the water, who measured their experience not in trips, but in seasons, in winters, in long, brutal stretches, away from anything resembling home. They worked shifts that ground the body down to instinct. They slept in narrow bunks that pitched and rolled through storms that lasted for days, and they knew this sea. They knew its moods better than they knew the streets of the towns they grew up in. They could read it the way you read a familiar face. Think about what that kind of experience actually does to a person's eyes. A man who has spent a decade watching for whales can tell you, at half a mile in poor light, whether that disturbance on the surface is a whale spout or just spray torn off the top of a swell by the wind. He doesn't have to think about it. He just knows. The same man can look at the shape and spacing of the waves and tell you what the weather is going to do 6 hours from now, and he'll usually be right. These are people whose entire professional value rests on not seeing things wrong, on not mistaking one thing for another, on reporting exactly what is there. So when men like that, separately, on different ships, in different years, describe the same impossible shape in the water, you do not get to wave it away as easily. You sit up, you listen. The first sighting. And here is the strange thing about every single one of these accounts. They begin the same way, always. It starts in the half-darkness of the polar night. Not true black, but that strange, sourceless grey that hangs over the Southern Ocean in those hours where everything seems drained of colour. The water, the sky, and the deck, all the same shade of old, weathered bone. The kind of light where your eyes strain for something to lock onto and find nothing. A crewman is at the rail or up on watch, doing what he has done 1,000 times before, and he notices something. A pale patch, low in the water off the bow, lighter than the sea around it, sitting just beneath the surface or breaking it slightly. And his first thought, every single time, is the most natural thought in the world out there. Ice. Of course it is ice. It is the most common thing in that water. Pale, low, half submerged, drifting. He has seen 10,000 pieces of it. He barely registers it. He looks away to do his job, to check an instrument, to write a number in a log, to wipe the cold spray off his face. And then he looks back, and this is the detail that turns the blood cold in every version of this story. The ice has changed position. Not drifted, not bobbed on a swell. Moved. It has traveled across his field of view in a way that drifting ice simply does not. Worse than that, it is moving against the current, slowly, steadily, deliberately. It is holding a line. This is the hinge the whole thing turns on. Ice has no will of its own. Ice goes where the water and the wind take it. It surrenders to the sea. It does not pick a direction and keep it. It does not push against the flow of the water around it. But this pale shape, whatever it was, held its course. It moved like something that had decided where it was going. And that is the thing a man cannot talk himself out of. This is important, so stay with it. A man can rationalize a shape in the dark. Of course he can. The human mind does it constantly. He can tell himself it was a weird piece of ice, an odd reflection, a tired brain making patterns out of nothing. He can argue himself back to calm, but he cannot rationalize intention. He cannot explain away the impression that the thing in the water had made a choice. The witnesses say more than the size, more than the color, more than anything else is what undid them. Not what it looked like, what it seemed to want. Called to the rail. And then comes the part that gives these accounts their strange, stubborn weight, because the man at the rail does not keep it to himself. He does not quietly note it and look away, hoping it goes. He calls out, he grabs the nearest crewman, points, says, look at that. What is that?" A second man comes to the rail, sometimes a third. And they stand there together, shoulder to shoulder, in the brutal cold, their breath fogging in front of them, watching the same pale form glide slowly past the hull. That is the element that makes this more than one man's bad night. A single witness can be tired, can be mistaken, can be primed by a story he heard once and forgot. But several men, awake, sober, professional, all looking at the same patch of water at the same moment, and all seeing the same impossible thing, that is harder to dismiss. They describe it the same way to each other in the moment. They argue about it afterward, and the shape they describe is the part that even now makes the hair stand up on the back of the neck, because it was wrong. Not wrong like a strange fish is wrong. Wrong in a way that pointed at something none of them wanted to say out loud. Not a whale. These were men who knew whales. That has to be understood before anything else makes sense. A whale is not a mystery to a survey crew at the bottom of the world. It is a co-worker. They had watched humpbacks roll and breach 1,000 times. They knew the slow grey hump of a minke breaking the surface to breathe. They knew the broad black back of a right whale, the way it lay heavy in the swell like a capsized boat. Every one of those animals has a logic to it, a shape you can name, a movement you can predict. A whale rises, it blows, it dives, and the body follows the head in a smooth, familiar arc. There is nothing about a whale that puzzles a man who has spent 10 years on the Southern Ocean. This, though, was longer than it had any right to be. It was pale where every animal they knew was dark, and it did not move like an animal that breathes air and dives for it. It moved like something built for the water itself. It turned, the witnesses say, the way a swimmer turns, not the roll of a whale, not the flick of a fish. A turn that had a torso in it, a turn that pivoted around a center, the way a human body pivots in a pool when it reaches the wall and pushes off. The shape. And then there was the arrangement. This is where the accounts stop being merely strange and start being something that crawls under the skin and stays there. Because what these men described again and again across different ships in different years was not a random blob of pale flesh. It had parts, and the parts were placed where you would not want them to be. At the top, a bulk, a mass that sat the way a head and a pair of shoulders sit, rounded at the crown, broadening below. Exactly the silhouette you see when a person stands with their back to you in dim light. Below that bulk, long pale appendages trailing down and out into the dark water. And some men, the ones who got the longest look, the ones whose voices dropped when they finally talked about it, some men described those appendages ending in something worse, a hand. 5 pale digits spread in the water. And in the most chilling versions, that hand was not still. It opened, it closed, slowly, as though the thing were testing the water or reaching for something, or simply flexing the way a person flexes a stiff hand in the cold. Sit with that detail, because it is the one that does the damage. A shape can be ice. A pale mask can be a trick of the half-light. But a hand that opens and closes is not a thing the mind can file under coincidence. It is a thing the mind files under fear. Where the accounts split. This is also the point where the accounts begin to split, and the splitting is its own kind of interesting because they do not all agree on what hung below that head and those arms. Some witnesses were certain they saw 2 legs, long, pale, trailing down into the black, kicking slowly, the way a swimmer kicks when they are barely moving, just holding their place in the water. A full human shape then, blown up to the length of a freighter, but others, a different set of crews, a different set of nights, described something else entirely below the torso. Not legs at all, a single smooth taper, the body narrowing from those broad shoulders down to a point ending in a fin. The whole lower half fused into one powerful tail. A mermaid shape, if you want the word for it, though no man on those decks would have reached for so soft a word in the moment. And then there are the few accounts that almost no one wants to repeat. The witnesses who got closest, the ones whose ship drifted near enough, or whose angle was just right that they say they saw the front of the thing, the face, and they describe a face with eyes set forward, not on the sides of the head, the way a fish's eyes sit, forward, both eyes facing the same direction, the way a predator's eyes sit, the way a human's eyes face, and in the worst of those tellings, the eyes did not stare blankly out at the sea. They turned. They found the men at the rail, and for one long frozen moment, the thing in the water looked back at the people who were looking at it. Where the legend came from now, step back from the deck for a moment, because to understand this legend, you have to understand where it actually came from, and the trail is murkier than the believers like to admit. Because for all the talk of survey crews and research ships and seasoned professionals, the Ningen did not arrive in the world through a logbook or a government report or a scientific paper. It arrived through a screen. The stories began to spread in the mid-2000s on Japanese internet forums, passed from anonymous user to anonymous user in the small hours of the night. The classic shape of the thing was always the same. Someone knew someone, a relative who had worked on a ship in the far south. A friend of a friend who had been out there and come back changed. A man who had seen something he would not describe in detail, who went quiet whenever it came up, who carried it like a weight. And with each retelling, the story grew. A new detail here, a sharper image there, the hand that opens and closes, the eyes that turn, the length that crept upward from 20 meters to 30 meters as the tellings multiplied. This is how legends breathe and grow in the dark, and the Ningen breathed and grew faster than most. But here is the part that matters, the single most important fact about the entire phenomenon, and it is hiding in plain sight. The name attached almost instantly, before the photos, before the arguments, before anyone tried to explain it away. The thing already had a name, and the name was the hook. Because the moment you call something Ningen, the moment you reach for the word that means human being, you have already told the whole story. You have already planted the image. You have already decided, before any evidence is weighed, that the thing in the cold water is not a beast at all, but something far worse, something that wears our shape. And once that word is in your head, no rational explanation ever fully pulls it back out. You can be told it was ice. You can be told it was a trick of the light, a smear of foam, a tired brain, reaching for a pattern. And some quiet part of you will still see a face in the water. That is the genius of the legend, and it is also its great weakness. The whole thing hangs on a single word. Take the name away, call it a pale, drifting mass, and the dread drains out of it. Leave the name in place, and it never lets go. The case for belief. So where does that leave the case? Strip away the forums and the friend of a friend and the slow swelling of the story, and you are left with two arguments standing against each other on the deck of a ship in the dark. The believers have one card, and it is stronger than skeptics like to admit: consistency. Because here is the thing that genuinely refuses to be waved away. Scattered witnesses on different vessels, in different years, separated by oceans and languages, and the simple fact that they never met, keep landing on the same shape, same impossible pale color, same vast length, same arrangement, a bulk on top like a head and shoulders, long limbs below. The unmistakable logic of a body built like ours. And the believer asks the question that should make you pause. If this were nothing but imagination, nothing but tired eyes and frightened minds, why does the imagination keep building the exact same monster? Why does it never wander? Why always the human shape? Never a tentacle, never a serpent, never 1,000 other things the dark could conjure. And the geography. The believers stand on ground so solid it is almost frightening, because the deep down there is real. The crushing dark is real. The blank spaces on the map are real, and science itself keeps quietly admitting that the ocean hides giants we never knew were there. The giant squid was a sailor's tall tale for centuries until a body finally washed up. Sharks that glow in the black water were found in our own lifetime. New whales, new fish, new things with no name at all are still being pulled from the deep. So to say the Southern Ocean could hide something enormous is not the raving of a believer. It is very nearly the plainest common sense, where the case turns. But, and here is where the case finally turns, could hide is not the same as does hide. And the gap between those two phrases is exactly where the Ningen falls apart, because the deep can conceal almost anything. It can hide a 60-foot animal in lightless water no human eye will ever reach. What it cannot do is hide a 30-meter humanoid swimming at the surface, in plain view beside a ship, in the grey light of dawn. The moment a thing is seen at the surface, it is by definition not hidden anymore. And a creature that size, breathing, surfacing, traveling those waters for as long as the legend claims, it would not be a secret whispered on a forum. It would be on every research vessel's deck, in every net, washed up on every southern beach, photographed 10,000 times. The very thing that makes the deep a good hiding place is the very thing the Ningen sightings violate. You cannot be both unseeable in the abyss and casually visible at the rail. So, the most likely answer is the quiet one. Sculpted ice, carved by wind and wave into a shape with a swell like shoulders and a ridge like a head, drifting in light so dim everything wears the color of old bone, and a human brain, wired across 1,000,000 years to find faces in shadow, to find bodies in noise, to never, ever miss the shape of another person, doing exactly what it was built to do. The consistency the believers love so much may mean nothing more than that the story traveled well, that once the first teller said human, every teller after saw human. The photographs stay unauthenticated, the name stays unexplained, and the file, by every official measure, stays closed. And yet the legend does not die. It surfaces every few years, on a new ship, from a new crew, in the mouth of someone who swears they had never heard the word before they saw the thing. And maybe that is the real reason it endures, long after the rational explanation should have buried it. Because the Ningen was never really about a creature at all. It is about the edges of the map, the places we have not been, the cold, dark, crushing distances where almost no one watches and almost no one goes. And it is about the oldest fear we carry, not that something monstrous lives out there in the dark, but that something out there in the dark has a face we would recognize, forward-facing eyes that find us at the rail and look back and seem, for one frozen moment, to know exactly what we are. So now the case sits with you. You have stood on the deck. You have seen the pale patch that should have been ice and wasn't, the shape that turned against the current, the hand that opened and closed in the black water, and you have heard the quiet explanation that fits almost all of it. Almost. So tell me honestly, after looking at everything, the consistency of the reports, the geography, and the witnesses who knew these waters better than their own streets, what do you think is really down there at the bottom of the world? Is it simply ice, shadows, and frightened minds trying to see a familiar face? Or could something truly unknown be moving slowly and deliberately beneath the waves, taking a form we were never supposed to discover? And which detail is hardest for you to explain away? The movement against the current, those forward-facing eyes, or the name itself, the same word those crews reached for before anyone could influence them? If you want more mysteries from the darkest corners of our planet, hit like and subscribe, because the next case gets even stranger. Leave your answer below. Tell me where you stand. And if you want to join me for the next case file, the mystery waiting at the edge of the map is darker still.